What happens when a routine television interview suddenly turns tense? What if a celebrated country music legend walks into the studio expecting to discuss new music, but instead finds himself answering pointed, dismissive questions from one of the show's hosts? In this retelling, we explore a dramatic, fictionalized television confrontation that quickly becomes the center of attention. Stay until the end and let us know your thoughts in the comments. The studio lights glowed brightly as Willie Nelson settled into the guest chair on The View. At 90 years old, he had spent decades in front of television cameras, appearing on countless talk shows hosted by some of the biggest names in entertainment. Interviews rarely made him nervous. Years of experience had taught him to remain calm no matter what questions came his way. Still, something about the atmosphere felt unusually tense. As crew members hurried across the stage preparing for the live broadcast, Willie quietly reviewed the topics he expected to discuss: his latest album, his upcoming performances, and the inspiration behind his newest songs. The appearance offered a chance to introduce his recent work to viewers who might not normally listen to country music. Nearby, however, the mood among the hosts seemed noticeably strained. Papers shuffled across the table. Whispered conversations drifted through the studio, and one comment appeared to catch everyone's attention. A remark questioning whether Willie still belonged in the spotlight lingered in the air, prompting awkward looks from those nearby. The countdown soon began. 5, 4, 3. The cameras went live. Whoopi Goldberg welcomed viewers with a warm introduction, praising Willie Nelson's remarkable career and mentioning the release of his newest album. Willie smiled politely and thanked everyone for inviting him onto the show. Before the conversation could settle into a comfortable rhythm, Joy Behar leaned forward with a skeptical expression. "So, Willie," she asked, "after more than 70 albums, do you ever worry you're simply repeating yourself? How many songs can someone write about the same ideas before audiences lose interest?" The question immediately shifted the atmosphere. The other panelists exchanged uncertain glances. Sarah Haynes remained silent, while Alyssa Farah Griffin lowered her eyes toward her notes. Everyone seemed to sense that the interview had taken an unexpected turn. Willie didn't react with anger. Instead, he answered in the calm, measured tone that had defined his public life for decades. "I think that's a fair question," he replied. "But I also think people sometimes make assumptions about country music. Every project gives me an opportunity to explore different experiences, different stories, and different perspectives." Joy quickly interrupted. "But you're 90 years old. Isn't there a point where artists should step aside and let younger performers take over?" A quiet murmur spread through the audience. Many viewers had expected a respectful conversation celebrating a legendary career. Instead, the discussion seemed to be drifting toward a debate about age and relevance. Willie paused before responding. "I've always believed passion doesn't have an expiration date," he said. "If someone still enjoys creating, and people still enjoy listening, why should age decide when that journey ends?" His answer drew scattered applause from audience members. Joy remained unconvinced. "Maybe people are simply nostalgic," she replied. "Perhaps they're celebrating memories more than the music itself." Willie smiled gently. "I've performed for audiences made up of several generations," he answered. "Music has a way of connecting people regardless of age. That's always been the goal." Whoopi attempted to guide the discussion toward Willie's recent collaborations with younger artists, hoping to shift the conversation back to music. Instead, Joy questioned whether those partnerships existed only to help Willie remain relevant in today's industry. The room grew noticeably quieter. Willie leaned forward slightly. "I've been fortunate to work with artists from many different backgrounds throughout my career," he explained. "Collaboration isn't about chasing popularity. It's about learning from one another and sharing creativity." Several audience members nodded in agreement. Trying once again to redirect the interview, Alyssa highlighted Willie's decades of support for American farmers through Farm Aid and praised the lasting impact of those efforts. Before Willie could respond, Joy challenged the topic as well, arguing that the annual benefit concerts had outlived their purpose and questioning whether they still made a meaningful difference. That remark changed the mood entirely. The discussion was no longer just about music or fame. It had become a conversation about values, legacy, and the causes Willie Nelson had supported throughout his life. The audience sat in complete silence, waiting to see how the legendary musician would respond next. Willie Nelson's expression remained calm, but there was a subtle firmness in his face as the conversation shifted toward one of the causes closest to his heart. Supporting family farmers had never been a publicity campaign for him. It was a lifelong commitment built over decades of advocacy, fundraising, and benefit concerts that had helped struggling agricultural communities across America. He paused before responding. "Joy," he said evenly, "I think it's important to remember that farming isn't just another profession. These are people who work every day to feed millions of families. They face challenges most of us never see." Joy dismissed the comment with a wave of her hand. "Let's not romanticize it," she replied. "The world has changed. Maybe it's time those old traditions changed, too." The atmosphere in the studio grew noticeably heavier. Sarah Haynes shifted uncomfortably in her chair, while Alyssa Farrah Griffin glanced toward the producers behind the cameras. Crew members quietly signaled for the discussion to move in a different direction, but the exchange continued. Willie remained remarkably composed. Over the course of a career spanning more than 6 decades, he had faced critics, skeptical interviewers, and difficult questions. Disagreement never bothered him. Personal attacks, however, were something else entirely. "You know," Willie began thoughtfully, "I've sat across from thousands of interviewers. Some loved my music, some didn't. Some agreed with my opinions, others challenged them. That's part of the job." He paused briefly. "But respect has always been the foundation of a good conversation." Joy folded her arms. "I'm simply asking questions people want answered," she insisted. "Someone has to challenge public figures instead of praising them." The tension was now impossible to ignore. Camera operators slowly zoomed closer, sensing the discussion had become far more dramatic than anyone expected. Members of Willie's touring team, seated in the audience, exchanged concerned looks as they watched the interview unfold. Hoping to steer things back toward music, Whoopi Goldberg smiled and changed the subject. "Willie, let's talk about your famous guitar. It's become almost as legendary as you are." For a moment, it looked as though the conversation might recover. Instead, Joy looked toward the well-worn acoustic guitar resting beside Willie's chair. "I honestly don't understand why you still perform with that old thing," she remarked. "It looks like it belongs behind museum glass." Willie gently placed his hand on the instrument. His voice softened. "This guitar has traveled with me for decades," he said. "It's been part of every stage, every recording session, every important chapter of my life. Every mark tells a story." Joy shrugged. "Or maybe it's simply worn out." The audience fell silent. Rather than showing frustration, Willie smiled. It wasn't the smile of someone preparing to argue. It was the expression of someone who had finally decided to address the situation directly. "You know what?" he said calmly. "Maybe we've spent enough time talking around the real issue." Everyone leaned forward. "I think we should have an honest conversation." Joy rolled her eyes. "Here comes another speech." "No," Willie replied. "Just a simple observation," he continued in the same measured tone. "For the last several minutes, you've questioned my music, my age, my collaborations, the causes I support, and now something that's meant a great deal to me throughout my career." He looked across the table. "I'm genuinely curious. What do you hope people watching at home take away from this conversation?" "I'm doing my job," Joy answered quickly. "Interviewers are supposed to ask difficult questions." Willie nodded. "There's a difference between asking difficult questions and trying to diminish someone." The audience remained completely still. Even the host seemed unsure how to respond. Joy defended her approach, pointing to her years in television and insisting that experience had taught her to challenge guests instead of flattering them. Willie listened patiently before offering one final thought. "Experience is valuable," he said, "but experience also teaches humility. The longer I've been fortunate enough to work in this industry, the more I've realized that every person has a story worth hearing. Whoopi attempted to move the discussion forward, but Willie gently continued. You've mentioned my albums, my collaborations with younger artists, and the charitable work I've been involved with for years. He smiled again. That's a remarkable amount of knowledge about someone you describe as no longer relevant. A ripple of laughter spread through the audience. Joy insisted she had simply done her research. Maybe, Willie replied with a quiet grin. Or maybe you've paid more attention to my work than you're willing to admit. The audience chuckled once more. Willie leaned back comfortably, his calm restored. I've learned something over the years, he concluded. People who spend the most energy criticizing what they claim doesn't matter are often revealing far more about themselves than about the person they're criticizing. The studio fell silent, waiting to see what would happen next. The atmosphere in the studio had become increasingly tense as the exchange continued. Then came another sharp remark that seemed to catch everyone off guard. Don't psychoanalyze me, Joy replied dismissively. A collective gasp spread through the audience. Several people shifted uneasily in their seats, and Sarah Haynes lowered her head, clearly uncomfortable with how personal the conversation had become. Even the production crew behind the cameras appeared uncertain about how the interview was unfolding. Willie Nelson didn't react with anger. Instead, he raised his eyebrows, slightly before answering in the same calm voice he had maintained from the beginning. So we've moved from discussing music to discussing people, he said quietly. That's an interesting change. Joy remained firm. I'm just being realistic, she replied. Artists eventually have their moment, and then it's time for someone else to take center stage. Willie smiled politely. And yet, he answered, I'm here today talking about a new album that has been warmly received by listeners. It's encouraging to know people continue to connect with new music, regardless of how long someone's career has lasted. The audience applauded softly. Joy shook her head. That doesn't prove much. The reaction from the audience became louder. A few people called out in disagreement before Willie gently raised his hand. Almost immediately, the room settled down again. It's all right, he said. Everyone is entitled to an opinion. Then he added thoughtfully, but opinions become much stronger when they're supported by understanding. The audience listened carefully. You don't have to enjoy my music, Willie continued. Music has always been subjective. Different songs speak to different people, and that's perfectly fine. He paused. What concerns me is dismissing something without recognizing the millions of listeners who have found comfort, inspiration, or memories in it. The room remained silent. Alyssa Farah Griffin finally spoke. Willie, your influence reaches far beyond country music. Artists from many different genres have spoken about the impact you've had on their careers. Willie smiled appreciatively. Thank you. That's very kind. He then turned back toward Joy. I don't think we're really debating music anymore. I think we're talking about how people choose to treat one another. Joy defended herself. I'm simply being honest. Willie nodded. Honesty is important. He leaned forward slightly. But honesty and kindness don't have to be opposites. His words seemed to change the atmosphere. Let me ask you something, he continued. When today's program is over, what do you hope viewers remember? Joy hesitated before answering. I hope they remember that I asked difficult questions. Willie responded gently. That's certainly part of an interviewer's job. He paused. But I also believe people remember how conversations make them feel. The audience remained completely still. They'll remember whether this discussion encouraged understanding or simply created conflict. Joy looked around the studio before insisting that she had only been questioning relevance in today's music industry. Willie acknowledged the point with a small nod. Questions about careers, success, or changing audiences are fair topics. Then he carefully reflected on the discussion. We've talked about my music. We've talked about my age. We've discussed collaborations with younger artists, charitable work, and even an old guitar that's traveled with me for decades. He smiled. Those are all conversations worth having. Another brief pause followed. But there's a difference between examining ideas and reducing someone to a collection of insults. The audience applauded. Willie continued without raising his voice. When conversations become personal, people stop listening to the ideas and start noticing the tone. Sarah Haynes finally spoke. Willie, you've remained remarkably composed throughout all of this. He nodded gratefully. I appreciate that. Then he looked back across the table. I also want to make something very clear. My feelings aren't hurt because someone dislikes my music. Every artist learns early that not everyone will enjoy what they create. He smiled warmly. What matters is treating people with basic respect, even when we disagree. The audience responded with another round of applause. Joy appeared increasingly uncomfortable as the discussion shifted away from music and toward the broader question of civility. Willie wasn't interested in winning an argument. Instead, he offered one final thought. I've spent many years meeting people from every walk of life, he said. Some agreed with me, others didn't. The conversations, I remember most weren't. The ones where everyone shared the same opinions. He paused, allowing the room to settle into complete silence. They were the ones where people listened first, spoke thoughtfully, and left each other with their dignity intact. The studio remained quiet for several seconds. It was no longer about chart positions, musical styles, or career longevity. It had become a conversation about respect, humility, and the responsibility that comes with having a public platform. When the conversation turned increasingly personal, Willie Nelson remained composed. He rested his hands together for a moment before speaking in a calm, deliberate voice that contrasted sharply with the tension filling the studio. When criticism focuses on the work, he began, that's part of being an artist. Every musician, actor, or writer has to accept that not everyone will enjoy what they create. He paused briefly. But when the conversation shifts from discussing ideas to mocking someone's age, dismissing their life's work, or ridiculing the things that matter most to them, it stops being constructive. The room grew noticeably quieter. What people are watching now isn't really a conversation about music anymore, Willie continued. It's becoming a conversation about how we choose to treat one another. Even the audience seemed reluctant to interrupt. Willie looked across the table before adding another thought. Public platforms come with responsibility. They're an opportunity to challenge ideas, ask difficult questions, and encourage meaningful discussion. They're not an invitation to forget basic respect. Joy defended herself immediately. I'm doing exactly what interviewers are supposed to do, she insisted. I'm asking hard questions. Willie nodded politely. Hard questions are important. He smiled gently. But there's a difference between asking difficult questions and making someone the target of personal ridicule. The audience applauded quietly. Willie continued. I've always believed conversations should leave room for disagreement without leaving dignity behind. The words seemed to settle across the studio. Joy appeared increasingly frustrated. I've spent years speaking up for people who deserve a voice, she replied. Don't tell me I don't understand fairness. I'm not questioning your intentions, Willie answered. I'm simply asking whether today's conversation reflects the values you believe in. The room fell silent again. If we believe respect matters, he continued, then it should matter even when we're talking to someone we disagree with. Whoopi Goldberg watched carefully, hoping the discussion would return to safer territory. But neither guest nor host seemed ready to move on. Joy argued that entertainment was changing and that younger generations deserved more attention. Willie considered the comment thoughtfully. I've never believed success belongs to only one generation, he replied. Every artist starts somewhere, and every generation brings something valuable. He smiled. The spotlight isn't something we compete for forever. It's something we share. That answer earned another wave of applause. The conversation had clearly shifted. Instead of debating albums or chart positions, viewers were now listening to a broader discussion about humility, legacy, and mutual respect. Willie slowly stood, picking up the guitar resting beside his chair. The movement immediately drew everyone's attention. Holding the familiar instrument, he addressed both the panel and the audience. "I came here today hoping we'd spend our time talking about music." He glanced around the studio. Music has always brought people together. Whether someone prefers country, rock, jazz, gospel, or hip-hop, every song has the potential to connect people who might otherwise never meet. He smiled warmly. "I still believe that's worth celebrating." The audience responded with sustained applause. Joy shook her head but remained silent. Willie continued in the same steady voice. "I've learned something over many years. When someone disagrees with you respectfully, you can learn something. When someone criticizes your work fairly, you can improve. But when conversations become driven by anger instead of curiosity, everyone loses." The room remained completely still. Willie looked toward the audience. "I want to thank everyone here for listening with open minds today." He nodded appreciatively. "No matter what kind of music you enjoy, I hope you continue supporting artists who create with honesty." Whoopi finally smiled, relieved that the atmosphere had softened. "Thank you, Willie," she said. "Your new album is available now, and we appreciate you joining us." Willie lightly strummed a few gentle chords on his guitar. The familiar sound immediately transformed the mood. Smiles returned throughout the audience. He looked into the camera one last time. "I've always believed music can heal a lot of things," he said. "Sometimes the best response to conflict isn't another argument." He smiled. "Sometimes it's simply another song." The audience rose to its feet with a standing ovation. As the applause echoed throughout the studio, the earlier tension seemed to disappear. Whatever opinions viewers held about the interview itself, one message had become clear by the end of the conversation. Grace under pressure often leaves a stronger impression than the loudest argument, and respect has a way of speaking louder than anger ever can.